it could be a happy Christmas, if not wanting gifts from China, though. It's because you're not going to find many of them under your Christmas tree this year because very tough restrictions over in China, in line with a zero-COVID policy, has been stalling factory output for some time now, and it's having, of course, a global impact. But it goes further than just the holiday gifts, of course. There are fears of shortages of everything from car parts to electronics. So let's try and get a sense of just what this risk means for us here in South Africa. Chris Hattingh from the Centre for Risk Analysis joining us this morning. Hello to you, Chris. And I see that Business Day reporting that one of the biggest Apple iPhone factories have just ended a five-day lockdown. This is over in Zhengzhou as well. So starting to come back, but unfortunately the damage already done.
Good morning, Gareth, and to the viewers. Absolutely. I think these ripple effects in supply chains around the world affect us in South Africa quite deeply, given how reliant we are on imported goods, finished products, even components that we use in our own manufacturing. Of course, we have a strong automobile industry. They rely on some components from other countries, such as China, for example. Even after the last 3 years of lockdowns, China is still very much one of the world's manufacturing and economic hubs. So when there's a downturn for them, it affects us quite deeply as well. And then secondly, the risk point lies, of course, for South African exporters in terms of raw materials, commodities, agricultural products. There's big demand in China for those products in the past, but if they continue on the sort of zero COVID path, trying to keep cases at a minimum, I think we're going to see lower demand for South African exports, which in turn means tighter economic conditions here at home. According to some estimates, around a quarter of China's total gross domestic product is now affected by lockdowns.
When you look at a country the size of China and the size of their economy and their industries, that is a massive knock to actually take as well. When is D-Day? When do you think, if you'd imagine, Chris, you had a crystal ball looking into next year, is there a time frame in your mind where the damage will be irreparable and the world would have had to move on away from China?
I think at least some measure of reshoring and onshoring will have already happened with supply chains and value chains, given the last 3 years of disruptions, of lockdowns, of various other issues with supply chains. We have, for example, had the Suez Canal being blocked in the Middle East because of that tanker that ran aground, that cargo ship. So I don't sort of see it as a D-Day as such. I see an element of factoring in that risk premium and some companies trying to make sure that they reallocate some of their manufacturing capacity away from China. I do think for President Xi Jinping, it is very important to have COVID cases still at a minimum. He very much has touted China's policy in terms of trying to keep the virus at bay as much as possible. So it'll take a lot for him to let go of that. It would mean serious negative effects more on their economic growth. I think for next year, we might only see 4% growth in China, which is very low for them given where they've been. But at the moment, you'll see some companies, some manufacturers from other countries, including South Africa, trying at least to bring back some of that manufacturing capacity. We've got, for example, in Africa, the opportunity of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. So we could bring back some of that manufacturing if, for example, we have reliable electricity. But for the time being, I think consumers should be used to at least some measure of shortages going forward. And perhaps for those who use iPhones and Macs, luckily I'm on Android, so I'm okay in this regard. For those on Apple devices, maybe they should prepare for those shortages coming soon.
Yeah, the iPhone and Android fight will continue, I'm afraid, on the iPhone side of things as well. So is there any positives? I know you just touched on now with, the trade in South Africa. What does South Africa do to, mitigate what is happening over in China? And is there a way for us to take advantage in a situation like this in the short term?
I think in terms of macroeconomic policy, there's definitely the argument to make sure that we up our own manufacturing capacity. And that means, for example, reliable electricity. So getting those private companies, those private generating capacities onto the grid so that we aren't just reliant on Eskom anymore. Without reliable electricity, you don't have reliable manufacturing. And then also getting skilled individuals both to stay in South Africa and to come to South Africa. So implementing the reforms that are necessary to mean we've got better economic growth, more pro-investment, more pro-property rights, so that we get skilled people coming here and building more factories, investing in higher, more advanced technology, more complex components That would also mean, in turn, that we're less exposed to imported inflation. We often hear from the Reserve Bank they're doing their best to combat inflation, but they can only do so much. When you import a lot of manufactured goods, you're more exposed when those goods cost more, and when there are shortages, you're more exposed to inflation. So there's quite a few things we could do in terms of macroeconomic policy. We will see now if the political will exists for that, and indeed that might not be top of mind given the latest developments that we're seeing around President Ramaphosa.